think I could win the Mrs. Heimlich pageant if I entered?
You see, Peggy, that's what you call a loaded question. No matter how I answer, there's a bullet in every chamber designed to blow my brains out.
Hello, humans, and thank you for coming to the Sovereign Brainwash. Today, I'm going to continue a series about the logical fallacies. Logical fallacies are there to make you wrong and the other person right through manipulation. Now today, I'm going to talk about the logical fallacy of the loaded question. The logical fallacy of the loaded question is a rhetoric tool to get the other person to trip up, and in a way, to get them to agree to a presumption. Now, while loaded questions aren't always intentional, it's important to know how to spot them and to fix this problem that we society and have been programmed to use in general. This will help prevent misunderstandings, misconceptions that can be implied from conversations that contain them. Now, making assumptions isn't necessarily always a bad thing. It's very natural for us to do, but it can be problematic. Has anyone ever asked you a question that instantly made you feel like a bad person, regardless of how you answered it? Like someone asking you, "Do you feel better now that you're not a complete idiot?" Making the assumption that whether you answer yes or no, that you were indeed an actual idiot before. See, a loaded question has a presumption built into the actual question, trying to make the other party confirm that presumption. This can be used in politics highly when asking a candidate, saying that, well, how do you feel that this protest is creating a bad economy? Or something of that nature, where that what they're doing simply implies that they are hurting others, whether or not they answer good, bad, right, wrong, yes, no. This can be as simple as, will you be paying with debit or credit today? Assuming that you're going to use a card and actually purchase into something that you might have necessarily not even agreed to buy yet. People might even sit there and use this kind of more or less as an ad hominem attack, where they go, "Have you always been this greedy?" Assuming that you've been greedy, usually. It's an attempt to persuade and manipulate the other party into tripping over their words and creating a situation that makes them look bad in general. When using a loaded question, this can easily get somebody second guessing themselves. And it's also a way of gaslighting another person, especially if that other party is not aware of the stereotype. There's so many studies out there based on how humans will take in their peers' opinions over their own. Definitely taking into account what the other person is saying and having this idea of peer pressure when it comes to making our own decisions. This means a lot of people can be persuaded into so many different situations when being asked a loaded question. In many cases, persuading the other person to choose a different candidate for their vote, or persuading another person to choose a different flavor of ice cream. The question might also influence the decision in general because of how the loaded question is worded. Clearly seeking a no response and or an adverse reaction, being you wouldn't want to necessarily take the blame for something. Because loaded questions are phrased in a way to make a recipient either agree or disagree, if you find yourself on the receiving end of a loaded question, it is really important to know to stand your ground and defend the stance. At first, consider what the person, if they even know what they're doing. Do they intentionally use this question? Do they know what they are using this question as a way of manipulation? Or are they just innocent to their own bias? Knowing this might impact on how you respond, depending on whether this was an intentional manipulation or just pure innocence. You could refuse to answer the question, but that in itself will run the risk of losing your credibility. So instead, what you need to do is challenge the assumption in the question first. You could say something like, I can't answer your question because there's an assumption in there that isn't correct. Like, no, I'm not a freaking idiot. Or you can simply ask the person to ask that question again without it being so loaded, meaning unload the presumption. Biases can definitely sneak up on you without you even realizing it. And everyone has an opinion. And even if we try to avoid it, they can leak into our conversations. It's so important to be aware of our tendencies to assume things and have assumptions. These assumptions can seem like, I know this person's going to disagree with me, or this assumption that people are going to agree with you. To avoid this mishap, you can break down your questions into smaller questions so that you and the other party can make sure you're on the same page. So be aware of common, overly loaded emotional words that imply some kind of bias. And then avoid using those. Avoid using absolutes. This definitely does not help. And to tone down any strong verbs or adjectives that will influence other people's thoughts. See, when it comes to the loaded question, we are all kind of in the same party. We've been programmed through sitcoms, media, marketing, it's everywhere. And it's become so normalized that we all are guilty of this. But here's the thing. Just because something's normal does not mean it's healthy. And it doesn't mean that it's using logic or good logic for that matter. So please educate yourself on more logical fallacies. Make sure you educate your children on these types of rhetoric and have a better mind frame when it comes to these certain tools or manipulations, because what happens at an individual level definitely is happening on the bigger scale level, as so below is above, and so on. So to change this paradigm, please share, like, and do all that other stuff. And be aware what a loaded question is. And bless you all. Have a good rest of your day, evening, night, whatever you're doing, and so on.